We have House File 288 before us next. Chair Nelson, if you'll come forward. Representative Nash, would you like to move this bill?
Madam Chair, I would move that House File 288 come before the committee with a referral to be laid over for possible inclusion in an omnibus bill.
Thank you very much. The bill is now before us, House File 288. Representative Nelson, to your bill.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members. And it feels kind of deja vu being back in state government finances. The last 4 years I did this, but we were in the basement. Well, you guys got to move up to the ground floor instead of having to be in the basement. But anyway, that aside, why am I bringing this bill forward? And what is this bill about? It's about using the stadium reserve, which is the resources we set up to pay off the bonds. That fund is at a point where there's enough money there that we can just about pay the bonds off, which saves us money. This bill is also about saving us as legislators from ourselves. I say that because too often when these legislatures see a pot of money growing, and this happened 2 years ago, when it was reported that the stadium reserve was so large, that we get this idea of thinking all the things we want to spend that money on and not letting it be used for what it was intended for. So this is what this does that also. Based on the November forecast, if we take the money from the stadium reserve, along with $9 million that the governor's proposing from the general fund, we will be able to pay off the bonds that were used to finance the stadium in 23, and it'll be 23 years early. This would save the state and our taxpayers $226 million over those 23 years in interest, which is a good thing. What the governor's proposing to do, and well, the governor can do this right now. It was actually in the original bill, but he has the power to pay these bonds off without the legislature being involved in it. Other than the $9 million he needs this year from the general fund, he can do this on his own. If we were to wait till next year, he could do it without getting $9 million out of the general fund, because they're projecting there's going to be enough in that fund to pay off the bonds. But that would cost the state an additional $30 million in interest for 1 year. So doing it now is going to save us money. When this is paid off, these will free that revenue up. Will go into the general fund to do other things that we want to do, from cutting taxes to funding housing, a whole myriad thing that we can do with that money. But there's no longer an obligation on those funds to pay off the stadium. Now, there are other issues that we're continuing to work on, and I believe the mayor is here to talk about this bill. There's obligations there. The city of Minneapolis, when the stadium was first built, the revenue that they were going to use for do that was committed to another source. So for the first 4 years, the state fronted them their portion of the payments off the $150 million that was their obligation for the stadium. We fronted them that, and now last year they started paying that money back. So we need to deal with those issues, and that's what we're doing. I mean, no, it's not in the original bill. We're going to have to come up with an amendment, but we've been working on that. Senator Frentz and I have been working on that. Again, that's why we're laying the bill over. You could ask what my interest in doing this, because I don't live in Minneapolis, but I'm a state citizen. I was part of the original group when the stadium was being built, negotiating with the state, negotiating with the cities, with the city of Minneapolis, negotiating with the Vikings to try and get the current stadium built. Part of that was setting up a capital improvement fund, and I think we need to make sure we keep that going as we move forward on this, because we want to make sure the stadium stays first class and stays up to date. Unlike what happened with the Metrodome, that we let it fall into disrepair and the roof collapsed. We all know that happened. But those things that happened is because we didn't spend the money as a state or as the city to put more money in to make sure that was maintained and kept up to date. I'm a construction worker. I'm a carpenter by trade, retired, but I'm building buildings. Those things create a lot of jobs, but I don't want to see us building another stadium in my lifetime. and I hope to live a long time, not at least another 30 years. So I don't want to have to build another stadium. One final note, and this has been thrown at me by a lot of people. This is a bill for the Vikings. It's not a Vikings bill. There really is no benefit to the Vikings of us paying this off. The only thing in the Vikings is in their contract, and it's in statute, is that we're supposed to maintain it as a first-class facility. But if the bonds are paid off, they're interested in keeping the first-class facility. That's their big issue. But also, if the bonds are paid off, there was a tax that was put on the suites to make as a backup tax. No money has been collected on that tax. So it's just sitting there in the books, but they would like that removed off the suites, and that's the only benefit they're asking for out of this. And with that, members, there was a couple of handouts that were given to you from the MMB, and I asked for these. One is a chart here, not a chart, goes through all the things, and the other one here is a chart that I asked him, what is every year, what's got to be paid, and you go through that. This is what would pay it off. If we don't pay it off, this is the payment schedule that would have to go for the city and for the Vikings. And with that, members, I'll open for questions or other testifiers. I don't have any myself.
Right. I do believe that the city of Minneapolis is here to testify on the bill. Are you comfortable with me bringing them forward at this time?
Yep.
Right. Mayor Fry, if you'd come forward, please. Thank you. If you would state your name and begin your testimony.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Jacob Fry. I am the mayor of Minneapolis, a resident of Minneapolis, a citizen of this state as well, and I'm here to testify on HF288, which is the bill associated with paying off the bonds for U.S. Bank Stadium. U.S. Bank Stadium is an asset to both the city and the state of Minnesota. It's one that's generated quite a bit of economic development in our region. It's an asset that draws people from all over the country and all over the world to our great state. And obviously, we want to make sure that this particular stadium is kept up well. I, like you, Representative Nelson, want to make sure that we do not need to build another stadium in your lifetime. And we full-heartedly support the effort right now to pay off these bonds. It's the smart move financially. There's no question about that. We also believe that if the bonds are paid off, the obligations that the city has should also be paid off. Simply put, it does not make sense for us to be paying debt on debt that no longer exists. There are about 5 main sections of payments that are presently being made that could be tackled as part of this upcoming legislation. The first is the debt service, which I mentioned. Again, if the debt is paid off, we should no longer be paying on that debt. The second and third purposes are for the MSFA, the Sports Facilities Association, to provide both capital improvement as well as operations. We want to align those with the expectations that our city generally has, and so we think that there's room for changing up how the formula itself functions. We have a number of other significant state assets within our city, including the Minneapolis Convention Center as well as Target Center. We're better able to anticipate what the expenses around operation and capital are for those facilities. For instance, on the Convention Center, we know that there's around $10 million on an annual basis that we will likely have to put in if revenues do not amount to what we are hoping for. Similarly, on Target Center, there's about $1.8 million in operations and about $5 million in capital expenses just to make sure that that facility itself is kept up to par and we can continue to attract great talent from around the country to perform. The fourth is the governor's recommendation, which that's the proposal is to actually eliminate Purpose 4, which is the advance that the state paid for the city's contribution. And then the final piece is the city would propose eliminating Purpose 5, which is a bit ambiguous and we believe can be tackled as part of the operations and maintenance for the facility itself. I'll also just note that there's been a lot that's changed over the last several years. There was a significant economic downturn, COVID-19 pandemic that pretty much entirely shut down those facilities for an extended period of time. That is not money that we're going to get back. Certainly, we want things to rebound as quickly as possible, but that money that we lost for those years is not coming back. And so, we fully believe that the state is making the right call in paying off these bonds ahead of time. It's the financially smart decision, and our position is that we should be a part of that along with the state of Minnesota. Thank you so much. I appreciate all of the work that representatives are doing on this legislation. It's critically important, and I'm happy to stand for questions.
Chair Nelson, if you will indulge me in just allowing me to ask the city a few questions, I think if we can get some general information on the table, I think then it can maybe limit scattered questions from the committee. Is that all right with you?
That's okay. And Madam Chair, if anyone's interested in seeing what the original bill was passed, they go back to it's online. They go back to the 2011, 2012 session when this was passed. It's House File 2958. And it lays out everything that was in the bill originally, that the costs and the sharing and where it goes. And as part of that, there's also, it's got to be mentioned that the Vikings are paying rent. The Vikings are paying in the operation, and the Vikings are also paying into the operational reserve fund, the capital improvement fund, excuse me, that to maintain the stadium. So they're paying into that also.
Yeah, and just so the committee knows, I have asked specifically that we keep this focused because we're state and local government. Basically today, this conversation, because we'll have opportunity to discuss this later again, on what it means to the state and what it means to the local government. And so one of the questions I'd like to ask of you, Mayor Fry, is what would the city of Minneapolis do with the savings if this obligation were to be eliminated for the city?
The savings would help us to budget for the future. I mean, I could give you a couple of hot items that I'm sure people would love to fund. That being said, the biggest piece is it allows us to be a fiscally responsible partner in municipality and plan. The obligations remain at about $307 million over 24 years. If you break that up on an annual basis, it's $12.8 million. But even that we can't anticipate in full because there are fluctuations as to capital and operations needs. That's why it's so important not just to tackle the outstanding debt payments, but also the formulas that were set in place a number of years ago. Nobody could have anticipated what has happened in the last few years, but certainly we can adjust.
Okay. And then, so you went through a quite extensive list of provisions that you would like for the committee to think about, whether it's, not paying on the obligation that the debt that no longer exists, the MSFA, the advance that the state paid, and then eliminating Purpose 5. You mentioned all of those. Is there anything further that you would want us to consider in this elimination?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So the first piece is the debt service. Of course, yes, we would like that eliminated, assuming the debt itself is eliminated. The items 2 and 3, we're not asking for elimination of those.
No.
We're asking for simplification of the
Right.
formula. And then items 4 and 5, yes, we're asking for elimination of those. There are not items beyond that, at least that I'm aware of at this point.
Okay. And then, let's see. And then I think you kind of said this in your opening, but why should the state pay for these facilities?
At this point, the revenues that we have anticipated have drastically exceeded the expectations. It is a statewide asset, and given that those revenues have exceeded and that we're planning as part of this bill to pay off the debt, again, it doesn't make sense to pay debt and make payments to it when that debt no longer exists. It's financially smart. It's just a good fiscal smart governance.
Okay, and the revenues you're referring to are the stadium fund,
I
is
am.
that correct? Okay. All right, with that, we will move to member questions. Representative Nash.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As one of the authors on this bill, and Representative Dowd is here as well with Chair Nelson. Chair Nelson,
You can have that. Thank you.
Chair Nelson, you and I had discussed this bill on the floor the other day, but you didn't mention one part. You had mentioned a significant savings that the city of Minneapolis will be able to take advantage of by avoiding certain things moving forward. If you would, for my members that are new here, by paying this off, they'll be avoiding certain numbers of a certain amount of interest and other payments. If you could go through that again, just real quick for us, I think that's a handy thing for our members to hear.
And my notes here, and these may not be totally accurate, but the flip chart that you were given, it lays a lot of this stuff out from MMB. But when it was financed, the state financed $498 million for the bonds. $398 million of that was the state share. $150 million was the city share, and that was part of the negotiations in the original bill. Because at the time, the city was still paying out the convention center, and those revenues that they would be targeted for the stadium, the state fronted them that money. Currently, there, as the mayor mentioned, $303 million. Currently, the current value of that $150 million with interest, just like a mortgage, was $333 million. Last year, they started paying that back. So they paid back $27 million so far. So it's about $304 million of the construction costs. So that's one cost that's there. The other one that the governor has proposed to forgive is there's $1.5 million in the in the capital improvement fund that the city pays in, the Vikings pay in. Again, the state fronted them that $150 million from 2016 to 2020. Again, they started paying back on that in 21, and that the value of that right now is about $40 million. The governor has proposed to eliminate that. And again, this is what I'm getting from MNB.
Nelson, are you referencing this?
That would be that, yes.
Okay, if I could ask members to look at page 3 of the MMB packet, the stadium reserve packet, I think it'll be easier for you to follow along with the conversation. Thank you. Please proceed, Chair Nelson.
And then, like I said, the ongoing costs are the $6 million that is the city's obligation in the bill in the current statute for the operating costs. The Vikings are paying $8.5 million into that. That's, again, to keep the operating. Again, that's what we're looking at. The city would save on that money. If they forgive that, they would. That's $6 million, or excuse me, that's the $1.5 million a year that wouldn't be paid into. So I mean, there's money to be saved here, and there's ways that we can work this out with the city and through the process, so that they benefit from us paying this off early. You know, the $303 million. That's if they start paying the amount going forward. Yeah, and that would be on the chart. This chart here that I gave my copy to the mayor, but this chart here is what they laid out, the MMB laid out. If they're paying 12.8 a year for going forward to 2046, that's the $333 million they're talking about. But if it's paid off, as the mayor said, I think we need to look at that as a mortgage. You pay off your mortgage early. You don't pay all that extra interest because it's gone. You're just paying on the principal and the interest from the past. So those are things that we need to negotiate and work on, and that's what we're working on, which is why we laid it over.
Thank you. May I ask Mayor Fry if he wants to add any additional comments to that, or? All right.
I don't at this time, no.
All right, thank you.
And thank you, Madam Chair. And once again, just to reframe that, not only does the state save, but the city of Minneapolis will save tremendous amounts of money. And I just didn't hear that in some of the testimony that we have gotten, so just wanted to make sure that we put that on the record, that both sides save. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes.
Do either of you have any closing comments? Oh, I'm sorry. Representative Bonner, I didn't see your name.
Thank you. You know, I think you know, Chair Nelson, publicly, I have been very supportive of this approach. You know, I tend to be a little bit more on the fiscally conservative side in many respects. I'm one of those crazy folks who have actually paid off all of my debt at this point in time. And we talked a little bit in this conversation about how revenues have exceeded expectations, and we're in a unique position to be able to pay this debt off early, which doesn't happen very often, but it's a really good problem to have. So I'm very supportive of this. And in particular, you spoke about the savings on interest over the course of the loan, that $226 million that we stand to save the taxpayers. I think that's a smart thing to do. Even next year alone, with $30 million that we save in interest versus the $9 million that we will spend out of the general fund, that's a net of $21 million. Now, $21 million in the grand scheme of things may not seem like a lot, but 226 over the course of the loan is nothing to sneeze at, so really appreciate that. As you know, I personally feel that since we were able to pay this off early and those revenue streams were very valuable, that I have some thoughts about how we could address that, but that's another issue for another day. So I just wanted to say for the record that I really appreciate this bill. I really appreciate the fact that we are being extremely responsible about how we spend taxpayer dollars. And to your point earlier, that we make sure that we keep our legislators in check and that we use things for the intended purpose, and that we, at the end of the day, make the taxpayers the real winners here. Thank you.
Chair Nelson, I see that the finance team of Minneapolis has handed Mayor Fry a note.
Yeah.
Would you like to share something further with us?
Yes, I do have a fairly obvious point, but one that I think bears perhaps repeating.
Yeah.
It is correct that the bill would result in savings to the state. However, it would not result in savings to the city unless these changes are made. We would not share in those savings.
Exactly. And Chair Nelson.
And Madam Chair and members, and as I said in my opening remarks, next year, if the governor were to let it not do it this year and go next year to paying it off, it's going to cost us $30 million more as a state in interest. But at that point, he could do it, and we wouldn't affect anything that happens with Minneapolis. It's my intention to make sure that we deal with those parts of law that are the ongoing obligation for the city of Minneapolis, because they also should share. We pay the loan off. We pay their part of the loan off. They should also share in some of those savings and moving forward.
Thank you. So we will, no further questions? Oh, sorry. Representative Harder.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you. I need some help understanding this. So the bill, you're wanting to pay off the stadium debt, correct? Am I understanding that correct?
Madam Chair, that's correct. Yeah.
Chair Nelson.
Hey, another question.
Representative Harder.
I need help understanding. So where does this come in? Minneapolis is not paying their full obligation to what I need help understanding that, because I got an issue with that.
Yeah.
Okay, Chair Nelson.
Madam Chair and members, as part of the original bill, and I said if you go back and look at it, it's very complex finance. Some of it's above my head also, but the state fronted the city money, or the Viking or the city share. The state fronted the city share at the beginning, and they're paying that back. They started paying that back last year, and so as part of this bill, like I said, it was to get it built, and the operating costs, we fronted that, they're paying those back. Again, the governor's proposing that because the debt's going to be eliminated, so the debt, the portion of the debt is theirs. Again, that's not in the bill, but that's something we need to work out.
May I just, if you don't mind,
Representative Flavor.
thank you. Representative Harder, I think the piece, and I have been working for months trying to get my head around this issue as well, so I appreciate some confusion. I think the piece that we're trying to work out here is that, one, the stadium reserve account was more successful than anybody anticipated. The second piece about this is now that the funds are there to pay off the construction, should Minneapolis continue to pay interest on a debt that no longer exists? That's part of the conversation. And we will, there are ongoing conversations to be had. And Chair Nelson, as I understand it, possibly you'll be bringing forward an amendment later to this bill that we can discuss in an agreement that all of the parties can get their head around. And then we'll have more further conversation about that. And so to that, I'm going to ask you if you have closing remarks for this bill before we lay it over.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members. I heard earlier Representative Nash say he's one of the most conservative thrifty people in the legislature. I would agree with that, and I would agree that I am, like Representative Bonner, I too am very tight with my money. I've joked at times that I'm a cheap Swede, and as we go forward, this makes sense to me. This makes sense to, I think, for the state. I paid my mortgage off early because I saved, I had the money to do it, and I was able, that relieved me of that obligation of that ongoing payment. Now I just got to pay my taxes. But that's, like I said, that's what this is about, is making sure that there's the money here in this fund that was set up to pay off the stadium loans. There's enough money to pay them off, pay the principal off, saving the state, that's $226 million. And I think that's just a smart thing for the state to be doing.
Great. Thank you, Chair Nelson. And with that, House File 288 is to laid over for possible inclusion. Thank you both for your testimony today.